Hey, Miss Sherrill's English class. Welcome to your second video of the Writer's Toolbox about evidence. Now, you're probably wondering, why is this strange man narrating these videos? Where is our teacher? Well, Miss Sherrill, unfortunately, has had a tooth pulled and looks like this at the moment, so she can't speak properly. So she's asked me to speak for her. So, at the moment, you're learning how to write clear. What does this mean? Well, it means that you have claims. This is what you know. You support those claims with evidence, how you know. You analyze those claims and explain why it's important, and you relate it all back together. CL.E.A.R. Claim, evidence, analysis, relate. So, you know something, but your teacher asks you, how do you know? Well, how do you know? You know because of evidence. So what is evidence? Evidence is something true that proves your claim is right. Now, unfortunately, you're still young, and in the eyes of the world, you're not considered the expert yet. So what you need to do is get your evidence to support your claims, to prove that you are right. And you need to use the words of experts. Now, experts can be authors of fiction, novels or poems or plays, or they can be the authors of non-fiction, articles, websites, newspapers. These are the experts you're going to use. You'll use their words to show your claim is correct. So let's look at an example from The Landlady. Now, we've all read the text. We know what it's about. It's a short story by Roald Dahl about a young man called Billy. He goes away on business and stays in a bed and breakfast. However, he is murdered by his landlady at the bed and breakfast. She's got this weird obsession with young, handsome, and seemingly successful men. She poisons Billy's tea. Now, the story explores the theme of deception. We've got Billy, who looks successful with new suit, walking quickly, but isn't so successful. He looks for a cheap hotel, for instance. We've got the landlady, who looks like this sweet old lady, but she's a proper crazy murderer. We've got her, as he looks through the window, he sees her puppy and her bird. Find out they're actually dead. The houses on the street look really expensive from afar. He gets closer, he sees they're all falling down. These are all examples of deception. Now, I'm reading the text, and I know for a fact that Roald Dahl develops the theme of deception through the characterization of Billy, the protagonist, the main character. But my teacher says, listen, Mr. Hopkins, how do you know that? Well, I know that because of the words of authors, because of the words of Roald Dahl. So here's the text. Now, I'm not going to read it to you, but I've got the first page from the text here. And as I read, I'm looking for words and phrases which show me, which prove that I'm correct in saying that Dahl develops the theme of deception through the way he characterizes Billy. Now, what's the best pieces of evidence you can use? You have to look for the best pieces. We don't want long sentences, we don't want paragraphs, we just want the best pieces. Now, I've decided to take these four things: the fact he was wearing a new suit, overcoat and hat, and the fact he walked briskly, trying to show that he's successful. And on the other side of things, that he took the cheaper, slow train down and he's looking for a cheap hotel. To me, these four things develop the theme of deception and show that my claim is correct. So I've got these four quotes here. Surely I can just put that in my paragraph. So, in Roald Dahl's short story, The Landlady, Dahl develops the theme of deception through the characterization of the protagonist. This can be seen when Dahl says, he was wearing a navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new suit, and he walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he decided, was the one characteristic of all businessmen. Also, he travelled down from London on the slow afternoon train and asked for a fairly cheap hotel. There's a problem with this. What I want you to do is pause this video, and I want you to go to your parent or a friend who has never read the story, and I want you to just walk up to them and say, he was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new brown suit. Pause the video and just say those words. I bet that they looked at you and went, huh? What are you talking about? They don't know what any of that means. They don't know who was wearing those clothes or why or when. the reader of your work doesn't understand this evidence. To understand this evidence, they need to see the full picture. They need all of the background information. Now, we have a special word for this background information. It's called context. Now, context is who. In this case, Billy Weaver, the protagonist of the short story, The Landlady. Context is also what. Billy Weaver is a salesperson on a business trip. Context is why. He's travelling for business. It's when. At night. Where? The town of Bar from London. And how? Via train. This is the background information that someone would need to understand all of the quotes on the left. You must provide context. Context is the full picture. Without it, readers of your work won't understand the evidence you use. So, here's how I have contextualized that evidence. In the story, Billy Weaver, a travelling salesman, travels to the town of Bar from London for business. He arrives at night via train. Now, as long as you have provided context, you have two options to present your evidence in your writing. The first option is the beginner option. It's for grades 6 and 7. You can introduce the author's words after you've contextualized. You can use phrases like the author writes, blah, 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 or the character says, blah, 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 the author states. If you're feeling a bit dangerous, you can try the advanced option that we'd use in grade 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in university. And this is to embed your evidence. You put the author's words inside of your words, inside of your contextual summary. Now, for grade 6 and 7, it's fine to introduce, but see this as a stepping stone on your way to being able to embed. When you feel ready, I want you to try and embed your evidence. So here's my example. This is me introducing the evidence. This is the beginner option. In the story, Billy Weaver, a travelling salesperson, travels to the town of Bar from London for business. He arrives at night via train. Dahl writes that Billy was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown Sherrill hat, and a new brown suit. Dahl also writes that Billy walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was the one common characteristic of all successful businessmen. However, Dahl states that Billy travelled down from London on the slow afternoon train. Also, Billy asked, is there a fairly cheap hotel? Now, if you pause this video and you say all of this to someone who hasn't read the story, they'll still think you're weird for walking up to them and randomly saying this, but they would understand the words in red. They would understand the author's words. They would have the full picture and they would know this context. Now you can see there's two colours. Blue is your words, the context. Red is the author's words. Have you, in this example, or have I in this example, contextualised by explaining who, what, when, where and why? Yes. Have I introduced the author's words? Well, I've written Dahl writes that Billy, Dahl also writes, however Dahl states, and also Billy asks. So yes, I've done that. Now, if you're feeling a bit dangerous and you think you're ready to challenge yourself and try embedding, you might write something like this. So the same claim, theme of deception is developed through characterization of protagonists. In the story, Billy Weaver, a travelling salesman, travels to the town of Bar from London on the slow afternoon train for business. When he arrives, Billy asked if there was a fairly cheap hotel in the area. However, even though Billy took a cheaper train and is looking for a cheap hotel, he was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown Sherrill hat, and a new brown suit. Moreover, Billy walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was the one common characteristic of all successful businessmen. Now, what's important to note here is that if we take a sentence, let's take the first sentence from in the story. In the story, Billy Weaver, a travelling salesman, travels to the town of Bar from London on the slow afternoon train for business. Does that make sense? Is that grammatically correct? If I remove the quotation marks and change all of the text colour to black, would that be a grammatically correct sentence? Yes. And this is what it means to embed. So have I introduced, contextualized by explaining who, what, when, where, why, and how? Yes, I've done that. Do I mix the author's words in mine? Yes. And do the sentences make sense grammatically? Yes. There's one more thing you need to know, and that's that these words are not your own. We need to give credit to the person who wrote them, the words in red, I mean. This also gives you a bit of respect, because if you're using the words of an expert, people who read your work are likely to believe you because you've used the words of experts. So what we do is we look for the page number at the bottom of the story, and after the evidence, we give a citation. We simply put in parentheses the author's surname, comma, and the page number. However, we don't do this after every sentence. We do it at the end, just before the period, like this. So remember, before you go, support your claims with evidence, only use evidence that is relevant, provide context so that the reader can understand the evidence, and embed the author's words in your sentences or introduce, and give the author credit by putting the surname and page number in parentheses. These answer the questions: how do I know? What is the best piece of evidence I can use? Does the reader of my work understand the evidence? Have I embedded the author's words into my own sentences or introduced?